As we begin the 1930s, the youth ministry at Lake Avenue Baptist Church was alive and well. In 1931, the senior high class developed an orchestra. This complemented the quartet that sang in places like Fairport Baptist Home. And on April 5, 1931, the Senior Christian Endeavor Society presented a play during evening worship. In 1931, the Senior High Fellowship also scheduled a lecture series from February through March. It was in the 1920s and 30s that, in addition to the youth ministries already mentioned, there were other youth activities. There was a Boys' Work Committee and a Young People's Commission. It would also appear that the Youth Commission, Boys' Work Committee, and the Young People's Sunday School classes, like the Clash Unusual, were all engaged in the work of nurturing the youth of the church. And it would also appear that during this era, the Boy Scout Troop number 53 was chartered at LABC. Here we have a short report that indicates the presence of that early scout troop, as well as some articles about things that they did during that period. It's not exactly clear when the Girl Scout program was established at LABC. However, by 1935, we know that the troops existed, troops number 12 and 53. And here in 1938, we have an image of a Boy Scout presentation. It was in 1939 that Dr. Daniel Poling, president of the World Union of Christian Endeavor, was featured as the speaker at the annual youth banquet at LABC. And at some point, Boy Scout Troop 53 began publishing a newsletter, The Voice of 53. In this issue, we discover that in 1939, a scouting unit was formed, the Sea Scouts. The Sea Scouts was aimed at older boys, many of whom had already acquired the rank of Eagle Scout. And it was in the 1940s that sports continued to be an important part of the youth ministries at LABC. The 29th Annual Young People's Banquet was held on April 12, 1940. And for the 1941 Young People's Banquet, the Youth Commission invited Reverend Dr. Edwin Dahlberg to be the featured speaker. In December of 1941, even though World War II began, LABC managed to put a basketball team on the courts. That next year, on May 22, 1942, the 31st Annual Banquet for All Youth was held. One particular experience of note was that the Youth Day in 1942 was opened with a presentation by the Young People's Commission and was broadcast over LABC radio station WHAM, formerly WBO. Fast forward to 1949, where we find the youth banquet held in January 1949, and if you note, the formal youth program was followed by dancing and the fireside circle. We have evidence here that the Boy Scout Troop number 53 and the Sea Scouts remained active throughout the 1940s. And here we have the charter application for the Senior Scout Unit. The Reverend Dr. Fred Dean, pastor of the Greece Baptist Church, was the featured speaker at the 1950 Annual Youth Banquet. Dr. Dean at the time was president of the New York Baptist Convention, and he served at Greece Baptist for 36 years. That next year, Earl Abel, a student minister at LABC, was invited to be the speaker of the 1951 Youth Banquet. And it was in 1951, under the leadership of Reverend Stan Borden, that the youth at LABC were presenting a monthly Sunday school radio program. And it was on January 28, 1951, that the youth of the church led an evening communion. Note that Mrs. Borden, the wife of Assistant Pastor Stan Borden, was at the organ. Mrs. Borden also led the junior choir. In terms of broader relationships, Sandra Lewis, who was serving as the vice president of the LABC Baptist Youth Fellowship, took an interest in the Indian youth of the Tonawanda Baptist Youth Fellowship. They were invited to come to LABC and to visit the youth. In 1958, the World Baptist Youth Conference was held in Toronto. Along with several other Baptist churches in Rochester, LABC sent youth delegates. Minister of Education at LABC was one of the 3 advisors who traveled with the youth to Toronto. The LABC youth were consistently involved in mission. In 1947, the Church World Service Organization was formed by 36 Protestant and Orthodox denominations. The purpose of the service was to assist displaced persons as the result of war and conflict. LABC youth took on a challenge called Share Our Surplus. They did so with Baptist youth fellowships from around the country to raise funds. And in March of 1961, New York State young people, including members from LABC, attended the Baptist Youth Fellowship Seminar in Washington, D.C. And it was in 1960 that Reverend James Miller, a student minister from 1960 to 1963, established a 2-year project in interstate understanding. The first year, 5 young people from West Virginia spent the summer in Rochester with the members of the LABC youth. And in 1961, 3 youth from LABC spent the summer in West Virginia. Jim was born and raised in West Virginia. That same year, the national BYF project was the Baptist Youth Fellowship Camp in Japan. The LABC youth accepted the challenge to raise funds for the project. Finally, it was in 1961 that LABC youth traveled to both Cayuga Lake and Green Lake, Wisconsin for events. Clearly, from 1931 to 1961, LABC youth ministry continued a tradition of fun, fellowship, education, worship, and mission.